Your big paper assignment this semester is called a communication analysis. So I'd like to go over what a communication analysis is and what this big paper should look like this semester. Don't worry, you'll turn it in pieces, so you'll just need to keep up with each piece as we go along. But I am going to give you the big picture so that you know what your end goal is. First, let's look at the big picture. Your final paper is essentially going to be like a 5-paragraph essay that you may have written for an English class or another class. However, you might decide to have 6 sections instead of 5. Now, notice I'm saying sections rather than paragraphs. It's possible that your main points will go longer than 1 paragraph, or if you're simply trying to make the organization really clear to your reader, it will need a paragraph break. But there should be 5 or 6 distinct sections. So, as you know, an essay almost always will have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So your communication analysis paper will indeed begin with an introduction. The first main point that I have listed here, or second section of this essay, is optional. You can have some background about the particular topic, or we might call it an artifact that you're going to analyze. So we will go into what an artifact is in just a moment, but all you need to know for right now is that's essentially the main topic of your paper. So you might decide that you want an entirely separate section that talks about the background of your particular artifact. You may decide that a couple of sentences in the introduction and some explanation in your application will cover enough background that the audience will understand what you're talking about. So if you choose a pretty well-known artifact, you're less likely to need a background point. If you choose a more obscure artifact, you might find that it is necessary to have a background point. The next section of the essay will be the explanation of the theory, model, method, or communication concept. I'm using all 4 of these terms interchangeably. As you get higher up in your studies in communication, you may find that there are nuanced differences between these, but for the purposes of this class and this particular paper, I'm using them interchangeably. So you'll see on this slide that I have a drawing of the transactional model of communication. This is a way to explain the communicative phenomena, so how communication happens. You'll notice there are words like noise, message, channel, context, communicator, axiology, worldview, etc., all in this diagram. This is one of the most basic models of communication that can apply to multiple artifacts. So in this main point, I'm going to explain whatever theory, model, or method or communication concept I choose. If I chose the transactional model, I would be explaining everything that's in that diagram. The next section of my paper is the application of the theory to the artifact. So whatever theory, model, method, communication concept that I've chosen, I'm going to show how that connects to my artifact or the topic of study. And again, we'll get into what makes a great artifact momentarily. The final point of my communication analysis paper will be implications. The implications are essentially why this analysis matters. So if I took the transactional model of communication and I applied it to the movie The Little Mermaid, in this third main point, I'm going to explain why that's important, what it has to do with the way that we think, the way that we communicate, and perhaps the way that we understand the transactional model of communication. Keep in mind that your paper needs to be in APA style, complete with an abstract and references. So let's talk about choosing an artifact. The artifact is essentially the topic that you are analyzing. It must fit the following criteria. First, it has to do with communication. Second, needs to be significant. And third is a frozen piece of communication, or it doesn't change. I'll explain. I think it's going to be easy for you to find something you're interested in analyzing that has to do with communication and is significant. Now, let me help you find categories of things that will work for this particular assignment. You'll notice on the slide that I have a political cartoon here. In the political cartoon, we see two stereotypical large white male politicians that have funny expressions on their faces, and one is holding a megaphone with the dollar bill sign on it, and he's saying aloud, "I believe in free speech for anyone who can afford it." Now, whether you find this political cartoon interesting or not is not particularly important right now. What is important is that you see this cartoon is not going to change, right? So like I could set it aside and come back to it much later and it's going to be the same. I could view it differently, I can use different theories to analyze it, but the actual cartoon itself is not going to change. So that is an example of a frozen piece of communication or something that doesn't change. Let me give you some more examples. Any movie or book would work. Second, a recorded speech or performance. Third, a piece of art or even a building. So it needs to be something that you can go back to over and over again and it will not have changed. So speaking of what it needs to be, let's talk about some things that you want to look out for when you're thinking about what artifact or topic you want to select for your communication analysis paper. So it cannot be an ongoing phenomena, something that you can't research, or something you don't have access to. So, for example, let's say I'm really interested in romantic relationships. Just in general, I want to study romantic relationships. That's not really going to work for this particular paper. Sure, that has to do with communication, and it's incredibly significant to many people. However, it's an ongoing phenomena. It's not a frozen piece of communication. You'll notice on this slide I have a photograph of two people in silhouette. Looks like they're standing somewhere in front of a beautiful sunset. The way their bodies are facing each other, it seems like they might kiss or embrace. This is sort of a representation of a romantic relationship. This photograph actually is something that I could analyze. However, I can't just talk about romantic relationships in general because they're ever changing. I can't even talk about a specific romantic relationship, like between myself and my partner, or a friend of mine and their partner, or even a famous person and their partner. However, if I'm really interested in studying romantic relationships and I want to choose an artifact that's related to that, I certainly can. For example, I could choose my favorite television show. I know this is going to be dated, but my favorite television show is House. It went off the air probably before any of you got interested in television shows, but there is a lot of romantic tension between two characters, the character of Dr. House and the character of Dr. Cuddy. And I could decide that I want to select one episode to analyze their relationship, or even an entire season, or the entire series of House. And the reason that will work for me is because I can go back and look at exactly what they said, how they said it, the way they were looking at each other. All of that is going to stay the same. It's not going to change because it's already been recorded. So some examples I have here that don't work: relationships in general, which we kind of went over just now, a poster hung in one classroom. So maybe it wasn't distributed anywhere. It's just somebody's poster that they hung up in one classroom. Or a phrase that your friend said one time. You have to be able to actually research your topic. It can't be something that you just happen to see one time. Another example might be if you went to a fantastic film festival and you saw this great film, but you have no way to go back and look at that film again. And the reason, even though that would make an excellent artifact, the reason it won't work for this particular paper is because if you can't access it again, then you can't accurately cite it or accurately cite particular lines in the movie. So you want to look out for that. So we've gone over sort of what the communication analysis paper should look like overall, and in particular, what to do when choosing your artifact. Now let's talk about the first part of the graded assignments, which will be the artifact proposal. And of course, that's not the proposal like for marriage. It's more like a business proposal. You're proposing a particular topic be used for your paper. So this will be maximum of 2 pages, and you need to explain what the artifact is, what it has to do with communication, why it's significant, why it's interesting, and as an option, any theory that you think might be connected to it. And if that makes you feel overwhelmed, just let that go. Don't worry about it. If you've taken a lot of communication classes before, or you're really into communication theory and you think you know what you want to use, great, you can include that. Use APA for in-text and reference citation of at least 2 sources. So this artifact proposal, write it like it's a paper. So you would write something like, the television show House was very popular for these years, and these 2 characters were of particular interest because, and maybe I think that it relates to the transactional model of communication because. I'm not going to write, I chose for my communication analysis paper this semester the television show House. And the reason I'd like you to use that more objective academic sounding writing right from the start is because the point of these smaller pieces of the assignment is so that you can literally build upon that and not have to do a lot of rewriting. So we've talked about the overall, and in particular what you need to do to choose your artifact and get started on that artifact proposal. In the next video, I will go from here talking about picking your theory and drafting that section of your paper.